Hello, James. Welcome to my channel.
Hello, thanks for having me again.
Yes. This is our second stream, isn't it?
It
Happy to have
is.
you back. So, for those of you who are joining us for the very first time, hi, my name is Nancy. I'm a PM coach. I'm joined today by James, who is another PM coach, and this is his second time on the channel. We're talking about the Amazon promotion process today, which is a topic that is top of mind for a lot of PMs that I know. Either they're already at Amazon or they're wanting to join Amazon. And this is something that's not really widely known. And I'm so happy that James is here to share his insights with us. So, with that, I'm going to hand the mic over to James. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And thank you again, Nancy, for having me on the stream. I certainly enjoy sharing some of my insights and experiences with folks who find them valuable. So, a bit about me. So, as Nancy said, I'm a product management career coach. So, I work with PMs, helping them sort of build and grow their careers in product management. And for some of them, that involves landing their next role or getting to the next level, which obviously is what we're focused on today, specifically about the process at Amazon. So in my PM career, I spent about 8.5 years at Amazon, starting in their US headquarters in Seattle for about 4.5 years, and then spending the next 4 years in their EU headquarters in Luxembourg. During that time, I interviewed hundreds of people. I also hired about 20 to 30 there, which was about a little over half the total PM hires I've done in my career. But I also promoted and got promoted myself multiple people from like PM to senior PM, and then like senior PM and sort of into a group or head of type role for product. And so, yeah, I really am looking forward to, again, unpacking a bit what that promotion process is like and kind of what to expect, what's challenging about it, and some ways you can kind of plan ahead.
So, we're about to dive into this topic for the next 30 minutes or so. Is there any underlying principles that you think will help us understand just high level how this process works in general?
Sure. Like many things at Amazon, it revolves around a document, or we'll always say a doc. And so the big part of the promotion process is that a document has to be written, usually by the hiring man or the manager. But in some cases, the individual who wants to get promoted can either contribute or sometimes be in the driver's seat for that. And so that's one major component. The other is feedback from people at or above the level that you're being promoted into. And so those are kind of the two key components that go into the promotion process.
Got it. And in terms of planning, since PMs are good planners, how
Hope so.
long should they anticipate this process to take?
Right. So I think a good point of insight for people who may be new to the company is, what are the expectations in terms of time towards eligibility? And so one of the metrics that's looked at from a management and sort of HR perspective is time in level or time in role. So
Mhm.
how long have you actively been employed in that role? And there's sort of like this dwell time average, which varies from job family to job family or from level to level. So think about average dwell time for someone who's a senior product manager that's
Mhm.
trying to get into a principal product manager role, which is kind of like the one level up. That sort of average dwell time varies depending on, were you promoted from PM to senior PM and now you're kind of in that level for a number of years, or were you hired as a senior PM, in which case there's an assumption there that you're already performing at or above the bar for half of the senior PMs kind of in your orbit. Um,
Can you tell us more about that assumption? If you're a newly hired senior PM, then the assumption is you're above average? Did
yes.
I say that right?
S-
Oh,
s-
okay.
Yes. So one of the hiring principles at Amazon is that every new hire should raise the bar.
Hmm.
And one of the ways that's achieved is by calibration for new hires. So this is one of the primary functions of an interview bar raiser, is to assess, is this person going to be a good hire for Amazon overall? And will they also sort of exceed the performance expectations of about 50% of people
Mm,
in that job family at the company. And so the intent is to make sure that everyone that comes into the company externally is already performing at or above sort of the 50% range.
I
So
see.
that's kind of what the mentality is, so that the bar is always raising, and the way we achieve that, or the way they achieve that, is making sure that any new hire is going to do better than the people already doing that job.
Got it. So does it mean that when you join as as senior, you're halfway there to the next level?
I think that's a fair assumption. So there's like an
Mm,
average dwell time from a senior PM to principal PM of anywhere from 5 to 7 years. You could assume that if you join as a senior PM, it's 2 to 3 years roughly from when you join, that you can expect to be considered, or almost expected that you should be progressing towards that promotion level.
I see. Got it. Fascinating as always. You mentioned the doc culture. Oh, hold on a second. I see a comment. Let me bring it up. Hello, LinkedIn user. Thank you for chiming in and tuning in. All right. Can you discuss the OP1 process at Amazon? What does the role look like of planning versus execution?
That's a whole other topic for probably a different live stream that has more to do with like business operations and planning for overall resources and headcount outside of the typical promotion process. So certainly would be happy to kind of talk about that. So whoever LinkedIn user is, feel free to send me a DM and I'd love to chat with you further about that.
Yeah. And if there's further interest, we could always ask if James wants to come back for the third time for for this topic. All
We'll
right.
take a
So
poll. We'll take a poll.
yes. Leave your comments and requests and comments for James in the comment box below. All right. So you mentioned the doc culture, which brings me to the first question of the stream, which is for someone preparing for the promo, how can they use the written narrative to address gaps or objections?
Right. So I think it might be helpful to provide context around what a promotion document normally entails. So first, it starts with describing the scope of the role that you're being promoted into. Now, let's stick with this like senior PM to principal PM framing. It'll make it easier as we go along. So first, it's like, what's the scope of the principal PM role you're being promoted into? And how does that compare against the scope and complexity of a job family description for a principal PM?
Mm,
The next big component is how do you sort of have evidence to substantiate you're performing at that level of scope and complexity through the lens of Amazon's leadership principles, which are a core component of how talent is evaluated in the interview process, how talent is evaluated in the annual review cycle. And so you need to be thinking about, as sort of the PM wanting to be promoted, what are some of those key stories, and what's the evidence that you're going to use as content for the document. And at least when I was writing these, you would have sort of a character limit. You need to write somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 characters, or maybe that's actually words. Long, almost a 6-pager, which includes the evidence in support of a promotion, but also like reasons not to promote, also through the lens of those leadership principles. And that forms the primary part of the document and the narrative, which sometimes managers work with the direct reports to put together. But if you are really wanting to take control of your career and you're wanting to be in the driver's seat, like, you should be operating with these sort of stories in mind and how you're building them together. So I think that's one part that you can be using, that written narrative, but also conversations with your manager. What are the gaps, and what sort of initiatives, what products, what outcomes do you need to drive to close some of those gaps?
I love it. And it brings me to the next question related to that is how can PMs align their achievements with the leadership principles to strengthen their promo case?
Sure. So Amazon has an annual review process, and part of it, they have built their own product called Forte, which is like, hey, what's your forte? And you kind of get feedback from your peers around leadership principle strengths, also leadership principle growth areas. You do your own self-reflection through these leadership principles or LPs, and then your manager will also write these about you as well.
Once a
So
year?
once a year, and you're probably not in a promotion conversation for the first 2 years that you're in your job. Just expect that that's highly irregular. It's not to say that it doesn't happen. I was fortunate enough to get my first promotion in just under 2 years, but like
That's amazing. Congrats.
thank you. But it's not common, but it does happen. So keep that in mind. But you get this signal, and that data starts to tell a story over time, right? So what are you consistently being rated highly as in terms of strengths? And then ongoing conversations with your manager, or new manager, because your manager will likely change during that 2-year period. And so from there, you're trying to identify what are the stories, what are the things that I'm doing as a PM that demonstrate competency, that can be framed around leadership principles, right? So deliver results. That's one of the leadership principles. So there it's like, have you delivered something, or has something about your product delivered an outcome that is a direct result of what you did? And how can you kind of describe that in a few paragraphs? And how does that align with the scope and complexity of like a principal PM role? So that's one way. And then they're not to promote. Generally, it ends up being, what are some of the growth areas that are repeated themes? And where is there evidence that you haven't sort of met the expectations? It's not just like, hey, they'll work on this as a principal PM. It's more of, this is actually where this person has fallen short. And do we see that they have the ability to overcome that in sort of the next level, and what opportunities exist for them to close those gaps?
So you mentioned that this could be a multi-year journey, which makes sense, and the time probably increases the more senior you go, would be my hypothesis. And it's also very common that you don't always have the same manager who supports you throughout the whole journey. So, how do we manage that when managers change? But then how do you keep up that momentum that you have intentionally built?
Right. Well, I can speak from personal experience, having been burned by a rotation of managers, and that impacting my trajectory. And it was really frustrating.
Yes.
And I certainly empathize with anyone who experiences that. The guidance would be, don't rely on your outgoing manager to hand off and maintain momentum with the new manager.
Yeah.
If you've been having conversations with your prior manager about your career growth and your promotion timeline, and while they're not normally in favor of like committing dates, every manager is going to have what's called a forward-looking slate, where there's a record of when they think you're likely to be eligible for promotion.
Is that
And some
documented?
it is part of sort of a manager's remit for noting the forward-looking slate potential promotion for individual contributors. Everyone generally has one, unless their performance is like below expectations, in which case a forward-looking slate could be like not expected. But yeah, you hire someone, and then you're already sort of putting down, hey, in this quarter, in this year, because the promotion cycles happen biannually for up to L7 levels or principal levels. So there's only like two cycles you get a year. It's at the annual review and sort of the mid-year review that's not as big, and you don't do any of that self-reflection or feedback, but managers are all doing sort of review of people's performance trends in the mid-year. But that's also when people can get promoted.
Okay. Got it. So it sounds like documentation is very important here. And it also sounds like the recommendation is for anything that you have probably already planned and discussed with your previous managers, you want to make sure that the new manager also has has visibility into what you have worked on before, whether it's in the official system or in your own documentation.
And like you're discussing it with them, right? And so here's sort of the lesson from my own experiences. I was reporting into a director, and we were having regular conversations. He was quite transparent with me compared to some other leaders in terms of timelines and do I already have the scope and complexity of this? And then I kind of assumed, because the new manager that got slotted in between me and that director came in, that there would be continuity there. And so
Mhm.
I waited a few months to kind of like bring it up again with this new manager, trying to, establish trust. I didn't know this person.
Right.
And then when I had that conversation, what I heard back was like almost surprise, as if this was the first time they were having a conversation with me about my career growth and my promotion path.
What does that
And
tell you?
what's that?
What does that tell you that they were surprised?
Well, you know, number one, like, it wasn't a priority for them. Number two, there was a possibility that my prior manager, my director,
Mhm.
it wasn't a priority for him either. Um, and I think the last thing it told me that don't rely on your manager to be the one driving your career growth. You
Yes,
have to be the one who's driving it. And
absolutely.
if you are relying on someone else to kind of carry you forward, even if you are great at your job, like, I knew what my performance ratings were, I knew what my reputation was in the organization. And, I had years of feedback, and I kind of put my trust in other people. And
Yeah,
I realized, like, that was the hard lesson learned, was like, no, you cannot rely on any manager, no matter how great a relationship you have with them. Your career growth will never be as high of a priority for anyone as it is for you. And so
absolutely.
don't rely on other people to kind of be in the
You
driver's
own
seat of
this.
it.
That's right.
You own it. You own
Yes.
it. You own it.
So
And I had a prior manager who was more proactive. But in retrospect, I think that was because they saw my growth as a prerequisite for their own growth.
yeah,
And so they're like,
absolutely.
oh, I'm going to lean into helping James get, this additional scope because he's doing a great job. And if I promote him, that's going to help me get promoted in the
Yes.
future. And so I benefited from that. And that played into the, okay, this is the experience I've had before. So maybe that will play out that way again, and let my lessons and how I learned them guide you in the future.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and that's spot on. Sometimes managers need to promote someone to show that they could grow people,
Yes,
and
absolutely.
when that opportunity arises, it's like a win-win for both sides, but that's not always the case.
No, it's certainly not. There's a whole flip side to that too, of like things managers have to do to do their growth. Again, maybe
True.
another live stream topic.
I love this, that we're planning ahead.
Hmm.
Alright, so next question for you is along the same topic, is this need for a compelling narrative. So what are the key elements of a compelling narrative that is needed for the promotion process?
So I talked earlier about the reasons to promote, reasons not to promote,
Mhm.
framed under the leadership principles. I think it's helpful to start to iterate on that, but then socialize it with other people who you will either need feedback from or actually input from on your promotion document. So I mentioned earlier, you're going to need people to actually contribute their own written assessment on reasons to promote, not to promote. And at least at the time I was writing these, you needed like 6 people. So if you're going to a principal PM, you need 6 principal PMs or directors contributing to a document. And so, as being someone who's trying to be in charge of their own promotion path, like, you should be going out and talking to those people and saying what you're trying to achieve, and that you value their input, and that you're looking for feedback, and socialize some of these written narrative pieces and get feedback on it. But
Mhm.
that also serves to give them insight and information to be writing on behalf of you in support of your promotion. So I think that feedback loop with your peers and some of the other leaders that you've been working with is another core component that I haven't really talked about so far today,
Got
but
it.
would be in addition to the other aspects of the stories and the experiences and what you've delivered.
And are these feedback from other product leaders or more cross-functional partners?
Uh, Promotion documents that successfully pass, the committee review, have diversity in the feedback providers, both in terms of level and job family. And
Mm,
so, again, if you're trying to go from senior PM to principal PM, you probably want a couple of principal PMs in there. You want a director in there who could be a director of product or even a director of engineering.
mm,
Great if you have a VP, although it's rare to kind of have that exposure and get that
mm,
kind of support. But also, if you have a senior engineering manager or maybe a senior manager of design, senior manager of program management, because when you're kind of operating at this senior to principal product management level, at Amazon, you end up working with those different types of stakeholders. And so if you have that sort of level of diversity of input, it makes for a stronger case when decisions are being made about a promotion, because the document is just a prerequisite for being considered, but not
got it.
actually a guarantee that you get it approved.
So let's say you try or your manager tries to put you up for promo this particular cycle, but it doesn't go through and you
Mhm.
receive more feedback. So you will go up again the next cycle if you're trending well. Do you use the same document or you write a
Yeah.
new one?
Yeah. Use it as a starting point. And normally you'll get feedback in the form of, hey, these were the leadership principles, maybe where the stories they didn't demonstrate the scope and complexity
Mm,
enough. And so now, again, the conversation you're having with your manager needs to be focused on like what needs to be true in this document or in what's going to happen over the next 6 months that will address the feedback
yeah.
so that there's a successful round two. Um,
It
yeah,
sounds like this document is the needle mover.
absolutely.
And it also sounds like you need to spend time on this document. And
Yes.
so does the manager.
Yeah, and it's not the kind of thing that 1 month before the
Yeah.
mid-year review or the annual review process is like the time to start. At that point, it's way too late.
Yeah.
Normally, you would kind of know, or your manager would have a strong perspective that you're on that forward-looking slate, and they want to support you. And like this is a multi-month effort
Yeah.
because there's other risks you have to try to mitigate for. Like, what happens if one of your feedback providers, if you have a minimum of 6,
Yeah.
they leave the company?
Plan
You,
B.
so target 10 feedback providers, right? Instead of 6. That way you account for people rotating, people leaving the company,
Right.
people not being supportive, when you're trying to not court them, but ideally you're having conversations one-to-one that are somewhat transparent what you're
Yeah.
trying to achieve. And generally, good leaders are going to be supportive of your growth because you grow well at Amazon, then they want people to stay there and continue doing a great
Yes.
job, which sort of plays into people trying to support the growth of others.
So the promo process happens during the performance review cycle.
Yeah.
Does it mean that you are now working on two separate goals? Or one is just to evaluate performance. And do you also collect feedback for that? Or that feedback collection is more geared toward the promo doc?
They're separate and you would have to do both, right?
Yeah.
So you're going to do your own annual self-assessment. You're going to ask peers for feedback.
Yeah.
But that feedback and input is like the form of a tweet, essentially, or whatever
I
you
see.
call those things now. I think like some of the feedback comments is like 60 words or less. So
Got
it's
it.
meant to be lower effort from people to contribute feedback
Mm,
compared to like 360 feedback that still existed when I started there, which was much more cumbersome and taxing from an operation standpoint. Um, but yeah, for the manager who's doing the work, there ends up being like a separate mechanism specifically for like reviewing promotion decisions with a committee if they do those, versus some promotions like from like PM to senior PM sometimes can just be done between the manager and the skip level. But sort of the higher ones get done by committee, and those are always in addition to the regular rituals that are done at the annual and biannual reviews.
Love it. And I know that you have to drop in 4 minutes. So, one last question for you for today. The common mistakes that you have seen when they're preparing for promos, and how can they avoid them? We talked about one, which is there needs to be enough time
Mhm.
dedicated to this process. If it's too late, then you each can just wait for the next cycle. And we also talked about not getting enough feedback, or not getting enough people to provide the feedback. So if you need six, you probably want to target 10. Is there anything else that you could share?
Yeah. I'll just reinforce something I shared earlier, which is not owning it enough yourself and sort of relying on your manager to do it for you. So the more you can be proactive and offer to write things or just proactively write them and socialize them for feedback.
Mhm.
The process isn't something that's intended to be this secret in terms of the actual mechanisms that you have to go through. Sometimes it's less transparent with respect to like your eligibility and like your performance conversations. But generally, if you want to go find out, okay, what's the process? What does a document template look like? Like that's not some guarded secret inside the company for managers only. So
Right.
you can go figure that stuff out. So be proactive, start that yourself. Most candidates or most employees that I managed would be like, hey, I want to get promoted. When am I going to get promoted? Versus what needs to be true so that I can be promoted? Or,
Right.
what can you give me more scope and complexity? The other thing on the topic of scope
Mhm.
is, does that opportunity even exist within your org?
Right.
This was one other sort of lesson experience that I had was, if you're within a team where there are no principal PMs, is there even a chance to get there? Because if there's not the scope and complexity at the principal level in your team or in your org, then
Yeah.
you'll never get promoted.
Yeah.
Or if you don't report into a L7 or a senior manager, they can't promote you to a level higher than they are.
Mm.
And so knowing these and planning around these is another thing, another point of advice. So yeah, people just not spending enough time trying to understand this process or expecting other people to just naturally tell them is a
Right.
common mistake.
There has to be a market, and then you're the product. There has to be product market fit.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Love
right.
that
So
concept.
tell us about the community that you run and how people could find it and work with you, etc.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you for having me today. So yeah, I do run a community called Product Sphere. And so today what it focuses on is helping people sort of land their next role. You can go to productsphere.co, or you can just visit my LinkedIn page and see more details there, which is, I think, what the QR code will go to.
Yes.
But I am launching a new aspect of that community that's focused on helping people get to the next level. And that can be at Amazon, that could be somewhere else. Promotion processes differ from company to company. But in general, no matter where you work, you have to be in the driver's seat. And I'd love to work and support more people and have PMs learn from each other about the ways they've navigated in the way they're achieving growth in their career.
I love that. Thank you so much, James, for coming on again. And we might see each other again the third time.
Thank you for having me again.
Thank
Have
you.
a
Take
wonderful rest of
care.
your day. Bye bye.
Bye.